fame came late to Anthony Fauci. Already 79 years old, he went from being an obscure public health doctor to a worldwide celebrity in just a few weeks. As the US and the world searched desperately for a reliable guide to the unfolding pandemic, one name came to the fore.
Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Dr. Fauci was often put in a difficult position, either back some of the president's less than scientific pronouncements or criticize. And when the president was pressing to reopen the country, Dr. Fauci struck a more cautious note.
There is a real risk that you will trigger an outbreak that you may not be able to control.
Dr. Anthony Fauci to throw out the first pitch.
What irked some Republicans is that Dr. Fauci seemed to enjoy his fame. Although he clearly had no future in baseball, many in Congress thought his accuracy early in the pandemic had been no better than his pitching arm.
Dr. Anthony Fauci.
He loves being on television and we let him do it. Sometimes he says things that are a little bit off and they get built up, unfortunately, but he's a nice guy. I like him, but he's called a lot of bad calls. He said, don't wear a mask.
China.
The president was referring to this interview from March.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
So, Dr. Fauci, it's Saturday morning.
And the White House pointed out other times at the start of the pandemic when Dr. Fauci had apparently made the wrong call. In late February, he was advising against a lockdown.
No, right now, at this moment, there is no need to change anything that you're doing on a day-by-day basis.
But by mid-April, he seemed to suggest he'd wanted a lockdown in February, but had encountered resistance.
If we had, right from the very beginning, shut everything down, it may have been a little bit different. But there was a lot of pushback about shutting things down back then.
According to polling, trust in Dr. Fauci was very high and broadly similar between Republicans and Democrats in April of this year. 80% of Democrats and 77% of Republicans told pollsters that they had a great deal or a fair amount of trust in Dr. Fauci. But by September, a huge chasm had emerged between the two groups. Whilst Democrat trust had increased to 86%, Republican trust had slipped back to just 48%.
Fauci is too useful to the Biden campaign. So until November, Fauci's word must be law, even when it doesn't make sense.
At one of the final Trump election rallies, the crowd made their feelings clear.
Don't tell anybody, but let me wait till a little bit after the election.
Today, America began rolling out the Pfizer vaccine. The first to get it were health workers. However, trust in the vaccine is far from universal. Part of the problem is that many Americans no longer trust the advice of public health officials like Dr. Fauci.
David Grossman reporting there. Well, earlier we spoke to Dr. Anthony Fauci, and I began by asking him whether the daily death toll of 3,000 Americans every day from coronavirus, which now eclipses the death toll seen in the first wave, is the peak of this crisis.
Well, I hope it does not go any more than that. We've really been hit very, very hard. A series of circumstances took an already difficult situation and made it worse, namely the onset of the colder weather where people are doing things indoors more than outdoors, number one. Number two, our Thanksgiving holiday where people traveled and congregated in family settings of, large dinners and social gatherings. And now we're entering into the Hanukkah Christmas season, which I'm quite concerned that the spike that we saw and that we're continuing to see might even amplify and get worse as we go into the Christmas holidays. So I think the month of the rest of December and into January are going to be very, very difficult months for us.
Can I ask you, you've mentioned Thanksgiving. Of course, it's a huge thing in the US, but not here. What lessons would you say that gives for Christmas with people in the UK and other parts of Europe looking forward to that time as a family time? What would your advice be?
Yeah, my advice would be something that I think is going to sadden people because everyone wants the family warmth and get together that is so characteristic of the Christmas season. But my recommendation would be to curtail traveling as much as you possibly can, visiting people, even though it's such an important part of the Christmas spirit. Keep the gatherings, the dinners and the indoor gatherings to as few people as possible, preferably for people that are an integral part of the household and avoid the kind of congregate settings that have been so characteristic. I know that's so difficult to accept because people already have what we call COVID fatigue. They're just tired of not leading a normal life. And when you're telling them in the Christmas holidays, which traditionally is the time of gathering together in the warmth of a family and friends atmosphere, we're saying to the best of your possibility, don't do that. I know that's tough, but I believe that's the only way we're going to prevent an even greater surge than we're already seeing.
It's a cancel Christmas message in effect, or postpone it.
Yeah, in some respects it is, unfortunately.
When you look back, I know even quite early on, you said that there were mitigations that could have been put in place sooner. I'm thinking of the springtime, February, March, April. What is it that you most regret about how the US went into this crisis? If you could change one thing, what would it be?
You know, it would be getting more of a uniformity of response. If you look at the various slopes that the United States experienced, by slope, I mean the inflection of cases going up, we got hit very badly in the very early spring, mostly in the New York metropolitan area and the Northeastern corridor. When that was able to get under control and go down, then we stayed at a baseline that was really very not acceptable at all. We had about 20,000 new cases a day. It never went below that. And then when we try to so-called open the country or open the economy towards the early summer, what we had was a splurge of cases that were associated with states not adhering to the recommended cautious, prudent way of how you open the economy.
How big a factor was the president's behavior in the spreading of this virus?
You know, I think that, rather than concentrate on the president's behavior, it looks at what the result was that we in the United States have 50 states. It's a federalist society, that independence of states is in many respects a good thing, except when you have a common problem.
In recent weeks, you've had a president who seemed more interested in playing golf than giving strong public messages on this.
Well, I cannot comment on that. I'm just trying, how difficult that is. We're really in a very difficult situation. We have a lot of divisiveness here in the United States. We have some sections of the country who, despite the fact that there are hospitals that are on the verge of being overrun with cases and the need for more healthcare providers who are trained, for more intensive care beds, who still believe that this isn't real, that it's a hoax, that it's not really something serious. It's astounding to me as a physician, a scientist, and a healthcare provider to see that even in the places that are the hardest hit, they don't seem to appreciate and look at the data that's staring them right in the face, that we are going through a very difficult period right now.
Do you think America's ability to recognize that and to unite around public health messages has declined during that long period, that 36 years you've had in that post?
Yeah, you know what happens? Public health outbreaks, pandemics are difficult enough under the best of circumstances. When you have profound divisiveness in society, where you have a public health response that in some respects becomes politicized, where wearing a mask or not becomes a political statement, where avoiding crowds or not becomes a political statement, it makes it extremely difficult to get one's control of what in and of itself, even under the best of circumstances, would be a challenging outbreak. So in the 36 years that I have been the director of the Infectious Disease Institute and have been involved in outbreaks ranging from HIV to Zika to Ebola to pandemic flu, this has been the most difficult from the standpoint of the seriousness and the enormity of it under such a truncated period of time, but also trying to get a coordinated response. It just has been very, very difficult.
Now, President-elect Biden, is promising focus. He's rolled out a policy, mask wearing for the first 100 days. Do you think he's going to make a real difference?
I hope so. I mean, it's important that we go in the right direction and end this. I think the vaccine is going to be a very important component of that. I think you have to give credit to the current administration with Operation Warp Speed to be able to come through this with a vaccine that is highly efficacious. So you've got to give credit where credit is due. I believe with the vaccine and good public health measures that are uniformly adhered to, I believe that we will go in the right direction.
We've been hearing this afternoon from our own health secretary about a new variant of the coronavirus. We're not quite sure whether he's referring to 614G or one of the other mutations that have been discussed in the scientific literature. But are you confident that vaccines like Pfizer, BioNTech or AstraZeneca will be efficacious against these mutations we're now seeing?
I mean, obviously, one can never be overconfident, but I feel from my experience with viruses over the years that when you see mutations in an RNA virus, whether or not it modifies the function, very frequently it has nothing to do with the efficacy of a vaccine. For example, the 614 D to G mutation is one that, in fact, when you look at the binding site of the antibodies that are made from the vaccine, it doesn't look at all like it's going to negatively impact the efficacy of the vaccine. If another mutation comes along, we'll see what happens with it. But thus far, we've not had any serious challenge to the efficacy of a vaccine based on mutations that occur in an RNA virus.
Lastly, you made some comment before about the UK moving ahead with licensing of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, which you then withdrew, and you corrected those remarks. But I just wanted to ask you about the AstraZeneca virus, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, I beg your pardon, which the UK hopes to put through before the end of the year and give regulatory approval to. What's the US position on that? Have you got a good sense that it is ready to be rolled out as well?
Well, we have a phase 3 trial with the AZ product right here in the United States that is accruing very well. And we will get an answer based on a full dose prime followed by a full dose boost. You know, the situation in the UK, they started off with a half dose followed by a full dose. And then when they did the comparisons, they had an unusual finding, which still is not explainable, why a half dose followed by a full dose, gave a better response than a full dose followed by a full dose. So I think I'm just going to hold back on any judgment on that until we get the full phase 3 trial that's done here in the United States on the same product.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, thank you so much for joining us on Newsnight.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.